excellent day for an exorcism.
Tonight we're going to discuss The Exorcist. Now this movie isn't for everybody, so viewer discretion is advised. Let's get at it.
Remember, we keep it tight, and it's a podcast world. We're ready to ignite. That's the lesson. We got it all. Tune in, turn up, come vibe with us, y'all. So remember.
Tonight we're going to talk about The Exorcist. It was a 1973 American supernatural horror film directed by William Friedkin, from a screenplay by William Peter Blatty, based on his 1971 novel. The film stars Ellen Burstyn, Max von Sydow, Jason Miller, and Linda Blair, and follows the demonic possession of a young girl and the attempt to rescue her through an exorcism by two Catholic priests.
So the movie opens up in Iraq, and I remember the first time I watched the movie, it didn't make much sense to me. It's like, why is this movie about a demonic possession starting off in Iraq with this archaeological site and an old man that's also a priest, and like none of that made any sense. And also, it doesn't have that much dialogue. I think it's like 6 lines of dialogue in the whole opening scene. It didn't seem to make any sense. But I did some more research on it, and it actually sets up the movie really, really well. So the movie starts off, it shows Father Marion. He's the old priest, and basically he finds the Pazuzu statue in Iraq. And what's cool, something I didn't notice, and I'm sure it wasn't planned, but it fits in well, is when he picks up the Pazuzu statue, there's a fly that lands on his hand as soon as he picks it up. And that's just a cool little coincidence, because we know that in the Bible, the devil is called the Lord of the Flies. Kind of a neat little side note there. So as soon as he finds the Pazuzu statue, stuff starts going really, really weird for Father Marion. And he notices people keep staring at him. So, the whole town, he seems very paranoid, and the whole town seems to be kind of watching him. And that's kind of a play on demonic forces are watching him now. And you'll see in the background, there's a lot of weird stuff. Like when the little waiter is carrying his tea, you'll notice that scene is quite a long time just to watch a waiter bring over a teapot. Well, it's because in the background, it's showing a tapestry of Pazuzu on the tapestry. So that's pretty cool. And then when Father Marion is actually taking his heart medication, you'll see a little kid in the background. He's holding a picture. He has it held up like this, and as he walks by, it's a picture of the devil. And so all of these things are trying to make your mind get all weird, and the town is watching him. Well, that transitions into, he brings the Pazuzu statue to, I'm not sure who the guy is. I don't know if anyone knows, but he's like I don't know if he's a scientist, if he's another priest in Iraq, but he brings it into that room, and that's the scene where the clock is ticking in the background. And as soon as he pulls out the Pazuzu statue, the clock stops ticking. And so that's kind of symbolizing Pazuzu is saying, it's time, like your time is up. So now it's me versus you. It's good versus bad, demonic versus, God. And I think that's a cool little side note.
I was going to say, a lot of people don't, when they watch this movie, they don't realize that the Pazuzu demon was never really after Reagan. It was always after the priest out there that was in Iraq. The demon used Reagan to get to him. A lot of people, when they see this movie, they just think of Reagan and all that good stuff. But that's how diabolical this demon was. It used this little girl to get to who he really wanted.
Yeah, that's something that really surprised me after watching more about it. The demon doesn't care that much about Reagan. It's all about Father Marion, and you can tell like that ending scene, the famous shot of Father Marion standing with the light from the window shining down on him.
Yeah, yeah.
As soon as Father Marion gets the letter saying, hey, you need to come do this exorcism, you see Reagan open her, like it shows the shot of Reagan opening her eyes, because it's Pazuzu. He's like, it's time, like it's finally the showdown. That it's been like the whole beginning of the movie is setting that up. And so something I thought was cool was, and I don't know if you guys noticed this, in that scene with the ticking clock, the guy hands Father Marion a pendant. Well, that pendant is a St. Joseph's medallion, and St. Joseph was Jesus' stepdad. And it says, the pendant just says, pray for us, St. Joseph. And what's interesting with that is at the end of the movie, we don't know how, but Father Karras, the young priest, he has that same medallion on. And when he asked Pazuzu, when he's like, take me, Pazuzu can't enter into Father Karras because he's wearing the pendant until Reagan tears it off. And then he's able to possess Father Karras. So I thought
Really,
that was
I never chimed in on that. I can't remember where he got that pendant from, but I know at one point in the movie he tries to give it to Reagan and she wouldn't take it, I think. But yeah, that's pretty cool. I never chimed in on that when I was watching the movie.
Yeah. So I thought that was cool. And then just the ending of that first like Iraq scene is the way that it's filmed is really, really cool. So you see Father Marion walking towards the side, like walking towards another side. And it's shot in a way where it looks like someone's watching him. So the film or the camera kind of goes past the pillars and is following him as he's walking. And that's when the shadow falls on him. He goes up on the hill, and that's when the dogs are fighting each other, and he's like standing in front of the Pazuzu statues where he sees the Pazuzu statue with his hand out like this. And that shot sets the rest of the movie to where, like, you've got the dogs fighting in the background, you've got the violins with its high little strum, and the wind is blowing, Father Marion versus Pazuzu, and that sets up the whole movie. And I did not pick up any of that when I watched it the first time. I was like, this is just so random. And after watching that, I think it sets it up.
You know,
great.
It's funny that you said that the wind was blowing. From what I read, Pazuzu is actually the demon of wind. And that's why every time that, he would come around, the wind would always be blowing and stuff like that. And they said later on in the movie, that's why the window in Reagan's room lifted up, and that's because so they could let the wind in, because he was the demon of the wind, stuff like that. But, this movie was made in 1973, and it was made for $12 million and ended up grossing $441 million. It was the number one movie in 1973. And I've talked to my mother-in-law. She was a teenager back in those days, and she actually went to the theaters and watched this thing in Cincinnati, Ohio. And the stories she's told me, you heard the rumors about people passing out and stuff like that. And she said that's all true. She said they were carrying people out of those theaters and stuff up there. And this movie, I don't think nobody had ever seen anything like it. I don't think that ever took a movie to this level with language and stuff like that. And in 73, you just didn't see that, and that's why this movie's, it'll be an icon movie for forever, because it broke so many boundaries when it came out. You know what I'm saying? The movie, revolves around Reagan, and this demon gets in Reagan. And like I said before, it's trying to go through Reagan to get to this, Catholic priest. And that's when we get the whole scary stuff that we've seen throughout the movie that everybody's scared of.
And I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of a tidbit on Father Marion. Father Marion had already faced off against Pazuzu before. And at the very beginning of the movie, that's kind of how he started to get really paranoid, because he knew what was about to go down. And it was almost like they were on this archaeological they was on this dig.
They was digging up the ground.
Yeah, they were digging up the ground. And this kid come and he told Marion that they had found something. Okay. So Marion goes over to where they were digging, and he actually gets into this kind of whole thing there with his pick, and he picks this thing out, and as soon as he pulls the Pazuzu statue out, that's when the wind starts blowing. That's when that fly lands on his hand and everything else. So it was almost like Pazuzu was waiting for him. And so whenever he unearthed the statue of Pazuzu, that's when the wind started blowing. It's almost like Pazuzu was waiting for him. And Father Marion, his paranoia was so bad back in that beginning scene, because he had already faced off against Pazuzu once. He knew how powerful of a demon it was. He could tell by the wind blowing that Pazuzu was back out, kind of, gunning for him, since he had already beat him once. And then that's when the paranoia really started to set in, and it was almost like he was being watched. Now, I did pick up on a little bit of that before I started researching, but after I did some research, then I found out, quite a bit more about that. But Corky, you were talking about, when this thing first come out, 1973, and how, people were fainting in the movie theater and people were running out. I think some people actually got sick and stuff. That movie broke a lot of taboos, broke a lot of barriers with what had, used to be shown on movies. And one of the main things wasn't having anything to do with the possession. One of the main things that got people so sick and got people so, nervous and messed up was the actual science of the movie. So right before Reagan really gets really bad possessed, and right before things really start to amp up, there's some things that's going wrong with her and everything, and her mom, which in the movie was an atheist, and Ellen Bernstein was actually a real-life atheist, as well as Max Sydow, which was the priest. Both of them were atheists. But
that's interesting.
So what happens is Reagan starts to get possessed. Things start to amp up. And the first thing that you do whenever things start going weird like that is you go to the doctor. So she took him to the doctor. She took Reagan to the hospital. They started running all of these tests and stuff. And there's one scene where they have this big needle, and they actually poke it into her neck, and there's a whole lot of blood that's going everywhere. That is one of the scenes that really messed with people back then, because they wasn't used to seeing that.
Exactly.
And it was more than just the possession. It was actual the scientific part of it with her.
Yeah, you said that scene was one of the scenes where most of the people fainted, is when they poked her with that needle, and because that was real blood and stuff that it showed at that point.
And it was very, very much people wasn't used to seeing that in movies.
Yeah, I don't know if Jens had noticed it, but I watched it last night, as Jens know, and it's been a long time since I've seen that movie. But in what I didn't pick up the first time when I was younger is the eyes. Did you notice the sequence of eyes, like the little statue that he found only had one eye left on it? Then the man or one of the workers or that he ran into was blind in one eye. And
really, I've never seen that.
And then when he went back to the dig site and was on the pyramid, and then the shadow, and then the image of the wind god pop up, even on the stone, one of the eyes was like discarded and you couldn't see it. and one of the signs of possession and demonic is only having one eye. So not only did the statue have it, but the one half blind guy, and then the statue in the desert only had one eye. Just something little that I noticed, and I was like, man, there's a lot of no eyes on one side.
Yeah, and Reagan too. She doesn't have one eye, but when she becomes super possessed, not like fully possessed,
that's a precursor to the super beast, baby. Come on,
yeah,
super freak. I mean,
and then Daniel mentioned the hospital scene. I think that realistic side of the '70s movie was just as eerie as the possession, because when you hear them antique MRI machines and stuff going on, and the noise that they made set a real eerie tone.
Yeah, all that banging and stuff.
The sound just made it eerie and made it a realistic side of the movie that wasn't that far-fetched, to people then. That probably was a real life traumatic experience, because back then everybody had been to the doctor. Most people then had that,
Yeah, even MRI machines today are still loud. And, back then, without the technology that they've got now, it was even that much worse,
Yeah.
But there was a lot of stuff besides the scientific stuff that really was very taboo. And a lot of that came after Reagan was possessed. So what you have is a little girl. She in the movie she was 12, and in real life I think Linda Blair was about 13 or 14 whenever she filmed it. So she's very much underage, and they had her doing some things in this movie that just wasn't shown, especially from an underage female girl. There was some things that she did with the crucifix. There was some language and whatnot. Go ahead, Corky.
Yeah, I was going to say that when they cast Linda Blair for this role, the director, from what he tells in the interviews today, he had two questions he asked her, because she was a young girl and there was going to be all this, this stuff's taboo today, let alone back in 1973.
Oh, yeah.
And he sat down and he asked her two questions. He said, "Are you okay with swearing?" And she said, "Yeah." And then he said, "Are you okay with masturbation?" And Linda Blair's reply to him was, "Of course I am. Doesn't everybody do it?"
I didn't know that she said that. Huh?
Yeah, that's according to this. From what I looked up today, that's what she said, and that's what got her cast at the role, because it seems like she was going to be fine with doing anything they asked her to do, and obviously her parents were okay with it too as well.
Well, they definitely had her doing some taboo stuff, especially for an underage female.
Exactly.
It was very, very taboo stuff. Never before. And actually, that stuff, just like what you said, a lot of that stuff that she was doing, and even saying, the language not so much anymore, but especially with the whole crucifix thing, they don't show stuff like that now, and they're way more, open to different things in movies now, and they don't show that kind of stuff now.
You take the scene where they're having the little dinner party at the house, and I think this is probably the first time she starts deviling out on everybody. She comes down out of her bedroom, she walks through, they're sitting there playing the piano and stuff. And, the one guy that she walks by was an astronaut. Did you guys know that? And she walks by and she whispers in his ear, "You're going to die up there." Nobody caught that at the time, but she was telling him, "Hey, you're an astronaut and you go to space, you're going to die up there." So she walks by him and she just kind of whispers in his ear, "You're going to die up there." And then she goes over and stands in the middle of the floor and just pees all over the place.
Yeah.
That right there is something that you don't see today, let alone back in 1973.
Right.
That, and I think when that scene happened, people were probably like, "What the freak am I watching right now, man? Because this is different,
Yeah. What did I just get myself into?
Yeah, what kind of movie am I in? Because they don't show that stuff on TV today. But, that's the realism of this movie, and that's why it was so good, because they didn't hold back on anything. They told the story how it was told,
And I want to get into that leads into this kind of subtopic, I guess, with the whole special effects that they did. See that, now if they was to try to do something like that, it would have probably have been some kind of CGI something, or it got helped out, But see, back then they didn't have CGI and stuff. A lot of that was they had to do their special effects in different ways and stuff. And so you get up to where they're actually going to do the exorcism, and they're inside of the bedroom, and it's cold, and you can see their breath and everything.
Yeah.
They actually had to refrigerate that room. Basically, they were using air conditioner to make it cold. Well, when you run an air conditioner, what that does is takes moisture out of the air. And so even though it's going to be real cold, you're not going to see your breath because there's no moisture. Right. So what they had to do is end up making the room a deep freeze. And I think they said that it ended up being like 32 below zero.
Golly, Bob.
To be able to see their breath. And they could only shoot just for a few minutes before the room actually warmed up to the point to where you couldn't see the breath anymore. So they had to go in and get the shot and get back out so that they could let the room cool back down. A lot of that stuff, like, if you want to add being able to see your breath now in a movie, you just add CGI, and you just add that in. It wasn't like that back then. It was very much a manual thing, an analog thing.
Yeah, that's why the special effects, I'm a diehard believer that practical effects are better than any CGI stuff that's ever been. When special effects became CGI, movies just haven't been the same since, especially movies like this. If this movie was done with CGI, you wouldn't get the same effect as you got with this, version we got here. There's no way.
Right.
Another thing, I'm talking about effects, the Mother Mary statue, that had to have been shocking. That's just shocking now. And imagine in the 70s, that has to be super shocking. And also the fact that it doesn't directly lay out who desecrated the statue, but you find out through watching that, okay, Reagan likes using clay. Reagan did it. But the fact that it never comes out and says that, and they actually, it's not CGI, it was real. That is shocking stuff. That for today's standards, definitely back then.
Well, what was you about to say, Corky? You had something.
Well, I was going to talk about Mercedes Cambridge. That's the woman that done the voice for the demon. They brought her in because obviously, like we said, they didn't have practical effect. Everything was practical effects, which meaning they didn't have CGI or however it is they do the voice stuff today as well. So they brought in Mercedes Cambridge. She done the voice of the Pazuzu demon. And she was a recovering alcoholic and stuff like that. And she told the director, she said, if I'm going to do this role and do this voice, she said, I'm going to have to start drinking again. I'm going to have to start smoking again. And that's what she did. She said to be able to get her voice to make that sound, she just had to be in that state and all that good stuff. And a cool tidbit about that is she actually had 2 priests with her the whole time the movie was made, because she was saying such vile and awful stuff that as soon as she would record, she would go ask for forgiveness right at that moment, because she just, was feeling so awful about the stuff she was saying.
Now that he mentioned alcohol, that kind of sent a bell off. This was probably the only movie that I remember watching where the priest drinks through multiple scenes of the movie. I don't think I recollect or recall any other movie with a priest in it that drinks alcohol like they had done. And in 73, was that normal then? Or
I don't know if it's normal.
Well,
A
in
priest can
the
drink alcohol, but I mean, that kind of goes into his faith dilemma, is that
Yeah.
he's dealing with that's kind of the whole, we have been kind of skirting around it, but the whole
Yeah.
theme of the movie is about faith. And I mean, you've got Father Marin that obviously has faith, and you can see it the full way, or the whole way through the movie. But Father Karras literally says at the bar, he's like, I'm losing my faith. Like, I don't have faith anymore.
Yeah, he's dealing with the death of his mother, and that's why, the demon's playing with his mind. That's why the demon, says the stuff she said about his mom, what she's doing, down in hell and stuff like that. They don't come out and say it in the movie, but I think, he was questioning his faith throughout all this.
he
And
was
Yeah, he's dealing with, he went into the priesthood when, he's fighting that he should have went into something where he made more money, because that way he could have helped his mother more. Then his mother dies, and he's kind of, blaming himself that he couldn't help her and do more for her. And I think that, he was really questioning his faith, because at one point they asked him, they said, hey, man, do you want to drink? And he's like, oh, yes, I want to drink. Because, I think he was at a point in his life where he was going to go one way or the other, And, then he was picked to go in here and help this priest battle this demon. And I think he was just struggling a lot through this movie, and that's why you see him in some of the situations he's in, because he was struggling so much with his faith.
Another taboo thing that I thought of too is, now that you would never see a group of doctors in a movie nowadays that would be like, throw their hands up, give up, and be like, oh, you need to go see an exorcist. So in 73, that would be taboo today too. Like, they ain't no doctor gonna say, well, I give up, you need to go do this.
They couldn't make no money doing that stuff. But that leads me to a question and I'll see if you know what the answer to this question is, Daniel. They prescribed Reagan 2 medicines in this movie. The first one was Ritalin. They prescribed her Ritalin, and when the Ritalin didn't work, they prescribed her another medicine. Do you know what that medicine was?
probably Thorazine.
Thorazine. And who else do we know that was prescribed Thorazine in the movie?
Thorazine was all over Halloween.
Yeah.
They mentioned Thorazine in a big old bunch of movies back in the 70s and 80s.
That's what I'm saying.
And
Thorazine must have been the drug of choice back in the day if you was going to go into a psych ward or something.
And
like
the thing about it is that from what I understand, Thorazine is actually not that bad if it's given in small doses. They would have had to have been given a big old bunch of huge doses of Thorazine in order to get, because they're talking about this stuff like it's like a horse tranquilizer or something.
Yeah.
And all the
they want people to
barely
be able to stand up.
Yeah. But it's funny that you mentioned Thorazine, because when I was looking at Thorazine, I was like, well, this stuff, it mellows people out, and if it's a high enough dosage, it could affect them like that. But then people were just talking about Thorazine in all them movies like it was some kind of horse tranquilizer, and after I found out a little bit about it, it's kindly comical. Go ahead, Brett.
I did want to say something else just to finish that topic of the theme of faith we were talking about.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole movie, it's centered around that. The director, he was an atheist. The author of the book, he was a Catholic. And so that was going on because the author of the book, he also wrote the screenplay, but then you have the director. So they were kind of battling that out. And then you've got the faith of the 2 priests. You've got the faith of Reagan and her mom, who they say that they're not religious, but then at the end, Reagan, she said she didn't remember anything. But the last thing Reagan did, she looked at the collar that the priest was wearing, and she gave him a kiss on the cheek. So it's, that it circles around back to that the whole thing, and I found that very, very fascinating how they were able to play it, and at the very end, I will say, even Father Karras, even though he did have trouble with faith, at the end he was able to get the last rites because his friend, the other priest, happened to be there, and he gave him the last rites. So he even turns out to have faith at the end.
And if you've ever seen part 3, you would know that he really didn't need his last rites.
So he didn't die, did he?
No, he was going to die, but he was kept alive. And as the Pazuzu entity was slipping out of him, I can't remember what it was called, the Zodiac Killer or somebody that was actually slipping the Zodiac Killer in. And so Father Karras was possessed in part 3, but he wasn't possessed by Pazuzu. He was possessed by the Zodiac Killer.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to cover that movie in a future episode, because I really like The Exorcist.
Oh,
part
not the Zodiac Killer, the Gemini Killer.
The Gemini
Killer.
Yeah, I've never watched Exorcist Part 3, but I would love to. Like,
It's got Brad Dourif in it, and Brad Dourif does the voice of Chucky, and he's a phenomenal actor. But he plays the possessed Karras, and the way that it's shot, it goes back and forth between actually showing Brad Dourif and actually showing Jason Miller. So whenever the demon inside of Jason Miller is talking, then it's actually Brad Dourif that's on screen.
Really? I didn't know that. That's cool.
Exorcist 3 is actually a really good movie. I went to go see it by myself at the theater. Come out back in 1990. I was only 11.
I know.
4 of them?
There's a bunch of them. I know.
Well, I've heard that part 2 sucks. I've never seen it, but I heard it sucks.
Yeah, it deals with Pazuzu again in the Exorcist 2. It's called The Heretic. It's got Linda Blair in it, and it deals with Pazuzu kind of coming back. It had a lot to do with voodoo and stuff like that, I think. But in fact, I probably haven't seen that whole movie either. And if I did, it's been too long for me to even remember. But The Exorcist 3 was really good. The Exorcist 4 is actually showing Marin as a young man, and he is somewhere, I can't remember where, but he ends up doing an exorcism against Pazuzu, and it shows the original battle.
Oh, so it's kind of like a prequel. Okay.
Is that when he's in North Africa? I think that's where they said he
somewhere.
was.
He's somewhere like that, and he's in some kind of little village or whatever.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. I know in part 3, there's one scene where this dude walks into this hospital room, then he comes out and shuts the door, and all of a sudden that door slams open. There's this white cloaked demon nurse dressed kind of thing come out there. That's one of the scariest jump scenes you'll ever see in your life. I remember the first time I watched that, I stood up and screamed.
It's a jump scare.
13 or 14 when I seen that.
It's really a jump scare and a half, but I'm sitting there in a darkened movie theater in 1990 by myself, 11 years old, and I'm the only person in there. They might have been, 2 or 3 other people, but they wasn't nobody sitting around me, and I'm sitting there, and that scene happened, and I was like, wow.
I'm trying to think what was going. Like, you're sitting at home, Daniel, in 1990, and you're probably playing some Nintendo, and you're like, hey, I'm going to go watch The Exorcist.
That's kind of what happened. That's kind of what happened. I probably seen like a preview or something on TV. In between my Saturday morning cartoons or something, I'm like, "Oh man, that looks awesome!" Mom,
they're advertising The Exorcist 3, The Heretic on.
They probably did.
It wasn't.
And then his mom is like, "Oh, you want to go see The Exorcist? Well, I'll take you, but I'm not staying with you."
You go from watching He-Man to go into The Exorcist.
I'll buy you a ticket, but that's it. And that's what happened. Because
to Pazuzu real quick.
You had to be 17 to buy the ticket for a rated R movie back then, so I wasn't old enough to buy none of them tickets, and my mom was the one that bought all of my tickets for me. And yes, that one, she sent me in there by myself, man. There I was 11 years old in a just about empty theater, and I seen that scene, freaked out. Now I didn't jump up and scream or anything, but it was,
Well, I
actually
did. That's a
7 of
scary
them.
scene. So, at the end, good prevails over evil, and they get the demon out of Reagan, and goes into the other priest, and we've discussed all that stuff. But ironically, at the end of the movie, Reagan doesn't remember anything. You guys know that she had complete amnesia, didn't remember anything like that, and so in my opinion, I think we've done a show where we talked about the scariest movies of all time. I know The Exorcist is my scariest movie of all time, but just let's get down to the point of the show where we rank it. Brent, I'll start with you. Rank this puppy 1 through 5 and tell me what your final thoughts are, buddy.
If you would have asked me a couple years ago, I would have gave it like a 3 out of 5. I didn't understand it. I thought it was just a regular scary movie. It didn't really scare me that much. So I would have gave it a 3 out of 5. Now, after knowing the backstory of all of this stuff, knowing how deep it is, it's a 5 out of 5. It's immediately jumps to some of my favorite scary movies of all time because of how deep it is. I love movies that are deep, that make you think. Movies nowadays, like I can't think of movies that do that anymore. It's all for the visuals and stuff, but just the philosophy of this movie, it makes you think. You can have good, deep conversations about it. I love that about it. 5 out of 5, one of the best scary movies of all time.
Hey, I agree because they don't. You talked about they don't make movies like this anymore, and they really don't, because if you'll think about, especially when this movie starts out, they're following the priest, and then it kind of bounces back and forth between Reagan and her family and the priest. It bounces back and forth as the movie goes on. You see what's happening with the priest, then it'll bounce back. You see what's happening with Reagan, and that's real deep storytelling. You just don't get that anymore. Nowadays it's teenagers. Go party, get killed. I mean, it's just basically. I went and watched a movie called Hard Eyes last weekend, and it's basically just a dude with a mask on, walking around killing everybody. I mean, it was an all right movie, but that's how much thought you get put into movies these days. Something like that.
Yeah, you're on mute.
You're muted.
You're on mute.
That was a comedy. I think that was like meant to be a comedy. It was a slasher, yes, but I honestly, there was so much comedy in that.
Did you guys go see it too?
Yeah, we saw it.
We saw it.
It's almost undeniable being a comedy.
Yeah,
it was a funny
I enjoyed.
movie.
A lot of people are trashing on the movie, but I liked it. I'd go watch it.
Well, I mean, it's
I
like
expected nothing else from it.
If
but
you
you're
go
also
to,
not going to be having conversations about good and evil after going to watch Hard.
If you go watch Hard Eyes expecting, a serious movie, then there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to go into them movies knowing what you're about to go watch. So if you're going into it thinking that you're, going to watch a legit scary movie, you're not like any kind of depth or whatever, you're going into it for the wrong reason. You have to go into those type movies knowing that they're not going to take themselves seriously, and you can't take the movie seriously either. And if you don't take the movie seriously, then you'll find it more enjoyable.
Exactly. Well, Dustin, let's get your ranking, buddy, and give me your final thoughts on The Exorcist.
Well, it was the first movie of its kind, and it's kind of in the spiritual realm of scary movies, and it's kind of its own thing. And it's probably the movie that started the whole spiritual ghost movies, and they've done 7 of them so far now. But they had a realistic aspect to it that wasn't too far-fetched. It was realistic. It's 73. I'm going to give it a 4.5 just because when I rewatched it last night, it wasn't nowhere near as scary as what I remembered it to be. There wasn't very many moments to me that popped up that made you shiver or jump out of the bed. Maybe it was because I was expecting it. Maybe it was more real to an extent that kind of made it spooky, because when you get into the spiritual stuff, anything, I guess, technically is possible because the unknown is what makes it what it was. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, definitely. Daniel, we'll end it with you, buddy. Let's see your ranking. What was your final thoughts on The Exorcist?
Well, when it comes to The Exorcist, that is definitely, because I compartmentalize, that is definitely in my top 3 horror movies of all time. Probably takes a number 2 seat right behind the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it was one of the movies that truly scared me when I seen it at much too young of an age. The whole religious aspect of it back then hadn't been done a whole lot before. They had a lot of symbolism in the movie. There was a lot of taboo that kind of took the horror genre kind of into another level. There was a lot of things that hadn't been done before. And just like what we were talking about, that movie, they were doing things in that movie that they're not even doing today. And so when it comes to a serious horror movie, that's what I consider a serious horror movie. And it's actually a deep movie. It's got a novel that was written by Blatty, and I've read the novel. The novel is just as good as what the movie was. So when I saw it as a kid, it really scared me. And just being on the caliber of movie that it is, I mean, it's a good movie in rankings of normal movies, not just the horror genre. You can set this movie up outside of the horror genre and talk about character depth, character arc, character development. It's a very character driven story. It's a good movie, not just a good horror movie, if that makes any sense. So based on all of that, it's got to be a 5 out of 5 for me. I love the movie.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. When I think about The Exorcist, I got to give it a 5 out of 5 because every possession movie you see these days are just a rip off of the original, man. The things that they did in 1973, as far as, golly bum, the cross scene and the urinating on the carpet and the way this demon spoke and talked about the guy's dead mother. And, if you want to think about, what it would be like if someone got possessed, this is probably how it would be. And the movie just seemed really real for people. And I think that's why it got the reaction it got in the theaters and stuff like that, because, they made this movie right. And that's what happened. So I'll give it a 5 out of 5. And, I don't think it could ever be duplicated. A lot of these movies out here try, but there's one of those movies that, you just can't beat the original. So 5 out of 5 for me. And let's see, we'll just shut this thing down. We want to thank everybody for listening to us. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.
See you. Bye.
Remember, we keep it tight, and it's a podcast world. We're ready to ignite. That's the lesson. We got it all. Tune in, turn up, come vibe with us, y'all. So remember.